Hello everybody, this is Mike History 2, and today I will be talking about the history of Nauru, everyone's favorite country. Yeah, the country that's known for nothing. Anyways, the history of Nauru begins in 1798 when the crew of the British ship Hunter passed by, becoming the first Europeans to see Nauru. From around 1830, Nauruans had contact with Europeans from whaling ships and traders who replenished their supplies at Nauru. The islanders traded food for alcoholic palm wine and firearms. In 1850, Nauru was established as a country with Aweida as its first head chief. The introduction of firearms and alcohol destroyed the peaceful coexistence of the 12 tribes living on the island. The Nauruan Civil War began in 1878 and resulted in a reduction of the population from 1,400 in 1843 to around 900 in 1888. And although, yes, that's only 500 people, when you consider the island's population, that's basically half the people dying in 4 decades. Ultimately, alcohol was banned and some arms were confiscated. In 1886, during the Anglo-Prussian declarations about the Western Pacific Ocean, Nauru was given to, I think you can guess by now, Prussia, because that's how it's been like for 3 of these videos. 2 years later, in 1888, the SMS Aber arrived with 36 men who went around the island and returned with the 12 chiefs, the European settlers, and a Gilbertese missionary. The chiefs were kept under house arrest until the next morning, when the vassalization ceremony began with the raising of the Prussian flag. The Prussians told the chiefs that they had to surrender all weapons and ammunition within 24 hours, or the chiefs would be taken prisoner. This ended the Nauruan Civil War. Christian missionaries from the Gilbert Islands, now known as Kiribati, which by the way I also made a video about, arrived that year. In 1900, Robert Fuller Ellis, a prospector from the United Kingdom, discovered phosphate. And I'll be honest, before I made this video, I had no idea what that even was. The Pacific Phosphate Company started to exploit the phosphate reserves in 1906. In 1914, well, yeah, this is becoming so predictable. World War I broke out, and the United Kingdom quickly conquered Nauru, which it kept as a vassal after the war ended in 1918. The next year, it created the British Phosphate Commission, which took over the rights to mine phosphate. In 1921, a flu outbreak killed 230 people. 2 years later, in 1923, it was given as a mandate of the United Kingdom by the League of Nations. In 1939, World War II broke out. In 1942, Australia became independent, with Nauru now as its vassal, but it was soon invaded and conquered by Japan on August 26th. The native Nauruans were badly treated by the Japanese. I mean, kind of like everyone, if we're being real. On one occasion, 39 leprosy sufferers were loaded onto boats, which were towed out to sea and sunk. The Japanese troops built an airfield on Nauru, which was bombed for the first time on March 25, 1943, preventing food supplies from being flown to Nauru. In 1943, the Japanese deported 1,200 Nauruans to work as laborers in the Chuuk Islands. In 1945, World War II ended, and Nauru once again became a vassal of Australia. Arrangements were made to repatriate from Chuuk the 737 Nauruans who had survived Japanese captivity there. They were returned to Nauru by the ship Trianza on January 1, 1946. In 1947, a trusteeship was established by the United Nations, and Australia, New Zealand, and the United Kingdom became the United Nations trustees of the island, with administration passing mostly to Australia. Nauru became more autonomous in 1966, and 2 years later, on January 31st, 1968, with Hammer de Robert, okay, that's, who calls their kid Hammer? Anyways, the head chief becoming its first president. In 1967, it bought the British Phosphate Commission, which became the Nauru Phosphate Commission in 1970. This made Nauru rich, but it soon started to run out of phosphates, so not that good. Nauru appealed to the International Court of Justice to compensate for the damage from almost a century of phosphate strip mining by foreign companies. In 1993, Australia offered Nauru an out-of-court settlement of $2.5 million Australian dollars annually for 20 years. New Zealand and the United Kingdom additionally agreed to pay a one-time settlement of $12 million each. Declining phosphate prices, the high cost of maintaining an international airline, and the government's financial mismanagement combined to make the economy collapse in the late 1990s. By 2000, Nauru was basically bankrupt. In December 1999, 4 major American banks banned dollar transactions with Nauru. The United States Department of State issued a report identifying Nauru as a major money laundering center used by drug traffickers and Russian criminals. And with this happy ending, the video's over. Anyways, thanks for liking.